Have you ever believed that the very people closest to you could be the ones to push you into the abyss? Emily Carter, 29 years old, a gentle woman and the owner of a small nail salon in Willow Creek, California, always thought marriage would be her safe harbor. She loved her husband, James Carter, with all her heart. After 2 years together, Emily only wanted to nurture a simple home, a place where love would always come before anything else. But what she never expected was that her greatest enemy would not be a stranger, but her own mother-in-law, Margaret Carter. At 63, Margaret was powerful, controlling all the family finances, and above all, she never respected her daughter-in-law. In her eyes, Emily was just a fragile girl, unworthy of holding on to happiness or the Carter family's wealth. The two-story house and the nail salon that Emily and James jointly owned became the center of everything. Not just a home and a workplace, but a symbol of independence, dignity, and the love Emily cherished. When control, marriage, and honor were threatened, what seemed peaceful suddenly turned into a hidden war full of manipulation. This was not just a family tragedy, but one of the most painful revenge stories, where truth and lies twisted together until it was suffocating. Emily had no idea that the rumors, the forged evidence, and the cruel traps set by her mother-in-law were only the beginning of a long and brutal battle. And then, during what seemed like an ordinary family dinner, when everyone gathered around the table, shocking secrets began to surface. This was only the beginning. Emily Carter was born and raised in a working-class immigrant family in California. She didn't grow up with wealth, but from a young age she carried patience and a pair of skillful hands. From the afternoons helping her mother trim nails and mix colors, Emily quietly nurtured a dream to one day open a small nail salon of her own. And when she became an adult, after years of saving every dollar, she finally turned that dream into reality. Her salon, Emily's Touch, sat right in the center of Willow Creek. Modest in size, yet known throughout town for her dedication and the gentle smile of its owner. Customers often said that whenever they stepped inside, they didn't just leave with pretty nails, but with a calmer soul. That was Emily. Kind, patient, but with a spark of resilience that always shone in her brown eyes. 2 years after marrying James Carter, life seemed simple, yet warm. James worked at the family construction company, while Emily ran the salon. They shared dinner every night, and on weekends, they strolled by Willow Lake together. In the two-story house where they lived, Emily cherished every little detail. The old clock on the wall her father had given her, the wooden desk where she kept her appointment book, the vase of lavender she replaced each morning in the living room. Small things, but they gave Emily a deep sense of safety, proof that she had truly found her home. And yet, within that picture of happiness, a shadow quietly lingered. Margaret Carter, Emily's mother-in-law, was a powerful, domineering woman. She had managed the Carter family finances for decades and was used to everyone obeying her. She looked at Emily with thinly veiled contempt. To her, a young woman with nothing more than a small nail salon could never be worthy of the Carter name. One evening, as Emily cleared the dinner table, Margaret dropped her poison with a sharp tongue. "What pride is there in a nail salon? This house, this company, they were built by the Carter family, not for an outsider to intrude." James shifted uncomfortably, murmuring, "Mother, Emily is my wife, she's family now." But Margaret only smirked. "Family? We'll see about that." Emily froze, her heart stung, but she swallowed the pain. She still believed love and patience could soften Margaret's heart. What Emily never forgot, however, was the legal clause established at the start of her marriage. Both the two-story house and the nail salon were in her and James's joint names. By law, any transfer required both signatures. To many, it was just a line in a contract. To Emily, it was a lifeline. Many times she looked at the copy tucked safely in her wooden drawer and found comfort, knowing her rights could not easily be erased. Every morning, Emily rose at 6 a.m. She brewed her cup of herbal tea, sat by the window, and watched sunlight spill over the small garden out front. That routine gave her calm before diving into the salon's busy day. Sometimes James would come out, wrap his arms around her, and whisper, "I'm lucky to have you, Emily." Those simple moments made her believe family happiness needed only love and shared effort. But over time, strange signs began to appear. A few loyal customers started acting distant, as if they had heard rumors whispered somewhere in town. One afternoon, while Emily was balancing her accounts, James came home with a financial report from the company. He sighed, troubled. "I don't understand these numbers. There are losses that don't make sense." Emily looked at him anxiously. "Are you sure it's accurate?" James shook his head. "I don't know, but my parents said it might be our spending." Emily's heart tightened. She could feel an invisible hand slowly tightening its grip on her life. Someone, most likely Margaret, was building a wall between her and the Carter family. That night, when she went downstairs for a glass of water, Emily froze at the sound of Margaret's voice on the phone. A hushed whisper, sharp with intent. "Don't worry. Soon, everything will belong to me. I just need the girl to sign her name." Emily stood paralyzed, the glass trembling in her hand. Her breath caught, the world spinning around her. Something was terribly wrong, and she knew then her days of peace were coming to an end. One September morning, the sky over Willow Creek was as clear as always, but for Emily, that day marked the beginning of a nightmare. When she opened the door to her nail salon, she saw two familiar customers waiting outside, their faces tense. They looked at her with strange eyes, filled with suspicion. One of them whispered, "I heard the news, but I never thought it would be you." Emily froze. "What news?" she asked nervously. The other only shook her head before walking away. Emily's heart pounded wildly. She had no idea what was happening. Just a few hours later, James came home with a dark expression. He threw a stack of papers onto the table. "Emily, explain this." Her hands trembled as she picked them up. It was a printed email filled with insinuations. From emily.carter@nailtouch.com to unknowndomain.com. Subject: about our secret meeting. "My love, I can't bear this life any longer. James is too naive, and only you bring me true joy. I've already prepared everything. All I need is your agreement, and I'll leave it all behind to be with you." Emily's mind reeled, her hands shaking violently. "James, this isn't mine. Someone faked it. I swear." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her husband. James frowned, his voice torn between trust and doubt. "But it's your email address. Your name is right there at the bottom. How can I not wonder?" Emily choked back sobs. "You have to believe me. I would never do this. You're everything to me, James." But in his eyes, trust was already beginning to waver. The rumor spread like wildfire across town. People whispered that Emily was cheating, that the salon was only a cover for her complicated private life. Customers stopped coming, and revenue fell. Worse still, Margaret seemed to have known before anyone else. At a family dinner, she casually dropped her venom. "I warned you, didn't I? That girl isn't clean. James, you need to think carefully. Marriage isn't a game." Emily bit her lip so hard it bled, forcing herself to stay composed. But inside, rage burned. She knew, without doubt, Margaret was behind it all. Who else could orchestrate such a scheme? Who else could release the rumor at the exact moment it would break her? That night, Emily sat alone in her study, clutching the marriage contract that contained the clause protecting her rights. "I have to hold on," she whispered. But the tears wouldn't stop. Her pain wasn't only from the slander, but from the doubt she saw in her husband's eyes, the man she loved with all her soul. In the silence, her phone buzzed. A text appeared from an anonymous number. "If you're smart, you'll sign the house and salon over. If not, the dirty truth about you will keep spreading." Emily froze, her whole body trembling. This was no longer baseless gossip. It was a direct threat. She wanted to scream, to run to everyone and prove her innocence, but her reason held her back. Whoever was behind this was cunning. The forged evidence was too perfect. If she lashed out recklessly, she would only fall deeper into their trap. Emily dropped her head onto the desk, her heart shattered. But in the depths of despair, a small spark lit up in her mind. If they can create fake evidence, then I can find the real truth. That thought, faint as it was, planted the seed of a counterattack. What Emily didn't know was that this was only the beginning. What lay ahead would be even darker, even crueler. The rumor of an affair was just the first move in a much bigger plan, and the puppeteer pulling the strings had no intention of stopping. Emily thought she had hit rock bottom, but she had no idea. But worse was coming. When the rumors about an affair had barely begun to fade, Emily's life was dragged deeper into a whirlwind of suspicion and pain. She thought she had already reached the edge of suffering, but in truth, It was only the first step in the dark chain of events Margaret had set in motion. One evening, the Carter family gathered for dinner. Wanting to prove her goodwill, Emily carefully prepared a beef stew the whole family loved. She measured every spice with care, pouring her heart into the pot. But when the dish was finally served, the moment the first spoon touched their lips, everyone's face twisted in disgust. The stew was unbearably salty, impossible to swallow. Margaret pounced without hesitation. In front of all the relatives, she sneered, "What a shame! She can't even make a simple meal, and yet she insists on keeping this house and keeping her place in the Carter family." Emily sat frozen, her face burning red, her hands clenched beneath the table. James stammered, trying to defend her. It must have been a mistake, somehow. But his words weren't enough to stop the scornful stares from those around them. Emily knew someone had tampered with her stew when she wasn't looking. After the meal, whispers spread throughout the family. "She's clumsy. Can't even take care of her husband." Emily's reputation sank even lower. That night she wept silently, but inside, her suspicion grew sharper. Margaret wasn't only destroying her with rumors, she was using petty tricks to humiliate her right inside the family home. Weeks later, James brought home a stack of papers from the family business. His face was tense, his voice heavy. "Emily, do you know anything about this? They say these losses are because you withdrew money for the salon." Emily gasped. "What? I never touched company funds." But there, in black and white, were records showing withdrawals under her name. Emily rushed to the bank in a panic. A familiar employee looked at her with pity and whispered, "These records have signs of being altered, but we can't say anything officially without an order." Emily clutched his hand, her voice trembling. "Please, I didn't do this. They're destroying me." He hesitated, then slipped her a small note with only 3 words, "Check the log. Transaction ID, 222-93482, user Emily Carter. Amount, $4,500. Note, personal withdrawal for salon. Timestamp, 02/11/2020 IP address mismatch. Logged in from New York server." Emily shivered at the words, IP address mismatch. She had never left Willow Creek. How could she have logged in from New York? When she brought the log home, James still looked unconvinced. "I want to believe you, Emily, but all the evidence points against you." Her heart shattered. Not only her husband, but even some relatives were starting to turn their backs, whispering behind her. Emily felt the world closing in, leaving her isolated and exposed. Another morning, Emily walked into her salon to find 2 employees whispering. When she approached, they went silent, then nervously handed her an envelope. Inside was a bank statement claiming Emily owed a massive debt from failed investments. Emily's voice cracked in shock. "This isn't possible. I never borrowed this money." But their eyes were filled with doubt. One of them muttered, "We need stable paychecks, Emily. If you can't cover your debts, can this salon even survive?" Her face drained of color. People who once called her kind Miss Emily now looked at her like she was on the verge of ruin. When she brought the statement home, Margaret was already waiting in the living room, sipping tea with calm disdain. "Oh, I heard about your financial troubles. Such a pity. Maybe it would be better if you signed the house and salon over to James. At least then, the family's honor would be preserved." Emily froze. For the first time, Margaret's true intent was laid bare. She wanted the assets. James stayed silent, but Emily could see in his eyes that his faith was slipping further. Relatives whispered she was greedy, incompetent. Customers thinned out. Emily's once bright world dimmed into shadows of doubt and mistrust. The cascade of blows left Emily drained. The salon was empty, her staff restless, her husband distant, her relatives cold. At family dinners, she sat silently, hearing whispers sting her heart. The lavender flowers she replaced each morning wilted faster, like her spirit itself. Each day, as she brewed her tea and looked in the mirror, she saw only a tired face and red, swollen eyes. She longed to scream her innocence, but the harder she resisted, the more everything seemed to turn against her. Margaret, on the other hand, grew bolder. She walked with the air of victory, her bitter smile a constant presence, her words dripping venom. Emily felt like she was being pushed into a corner, no way out. And then, one gloomy afternoon, Margaret made her boldest move. She summoned the entire extended family to the house, claiming it was time to settle the family matter once and for all. When Emily heard the news, her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a family dinner, it was a hidden trial. Margaret had planned carefully, and this time she was ready to take one step too far and overreach to crush Emily completely. At that family gathering, the air inside the two-story house was so suffocating. Emily felt as if every breath weighed heavy on her chest. The Carter relatives sat around the long dining table, their faces tight with tension. James sat beside her, but his hand rested coldly on his thigh, no longer reaching out for the comforting embrace he once gave. Margaret stood at the head of the table, clutching a thick stack of files. Her voice was sharp, commanding. "Today, I will present the final evidence to show everyone why Emily is unworthy of being a Carter daughter-in-law." She laid out papers across the table, fake bank statements, falsified reports. Her words struck like knives. She has stolen from the company, secretly taken loans, and even committed adultery. Our family's name will be ruined if we allow this to continue. Murmurs spread quickly, a few relatives nodding in agreement. Emily's face burned hot, every nerve screaming to shout back, but all eyes were on Margaret, as if her words were undeniable truth. Emily's voice trembled. "These documents are all fake. I have done nothing wrong. Please, believe me." But an elder relative shook his head. "Paper and ink don't lie. We must protect the family's honor." At that moment, Uncle Henry, who had supported Margaret from the beginning, suddenly sighed. "Margaret, you've gone too far." The room turned toward him in shock. But Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a cold, bitter laugh. "You don't understand, Henry. This house, that salon, if they're not in my hands, the entire family will collapse." Emily's eyes widened, her heartbeat racing. That one sentence was the first crack in the mask. The truth slipping out at last. Margaret was drowning in debt from failed real estate investments. She needed the house and the salon, the only assets with legal value under James and Emily's names, to mortgage and save herself from ruin. Emily's throat tightened. "So all of this was just to pay off your debts?" Margaret's eyes flared with rage. "Yes, and you have no right to stop me. If it weren't for you, I'd have solved this long ago." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted into hushed chatter. A few relatives began to doubt, but Margaret quickly seized control, her glare slicing through the air, silencing them all. James, the one person Emily had hoped would defend her, remained silent. When she turned to him, tears rolling down her cheeks, he only sighed. I don't know what to believe anymore." Those words pierced her heart like a blade. The man she loved most, the one who once promised to protect and trust her, now swayed between truth and lies. Sensing her victory, Margaret struck. She pushed a stack of documents across the table. "If you want to keep a shred of dignity, sign these. Transfer the house and the salon to James. Do that, and I won't press further." Emily froze. It was a transfer agreement, a noose tightening around her neck. She looked down at the contract, her hands trembling. In that moment, her world seemed to collapse. The salon, her lifelong dream, the house, the home she built with love, and James, the man she once thought unshakable, all of it was being stolen away. Just then, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled to open it. A file had been sent from an unknown number. She pressed play, and Margaret's voice filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. "She must sign it over. If not, I'll fabricate more affairs. I'll smear her until no one believes in her anymore. When that happens, James will have no choice but to leave her." Emily's face went pale as she lifted her gaze to Margaret, but in that charged moment, with so many eyes filled with suspicion, she couldn't risk playing it for everyone. If she revealed it too soon, without witnesses and legal support, they might call it fake. She clenched the phone in her hand, her silent hope burning in her chest. When the meeting finally ended, the family dispersed with doubt still lingering in their eyes. James avoided looking at his wife, while Margaret smiled triumphantly, like a conqueror who had won the war. Emily stepped out onto the porch, the night wind cold against her skin. She felt as though she had lost everything, as if she had been pushed into the deepest abyss. Her thoughts raced, back to her empty salon, the whispers that followed her, the uneasy stares from her employees, and worst of all, the look of uncertainty in James's eyes. Emily felt as though her entire world had been ripped from her hands. But when she returned to her room, she opened the wooden drawer and her eyes fell on the marriage contract. On that piece of paper, one clause was clear as day. Any transfer of the house or salon required the consent of both spouses. Emily closed the drawer slowly, her hand tightening into a fist. Tears still streaked her face, but in her gaze, a new light flickered. She realized that Margaret, in her greed, had revealed her fatal weakness. In the stillness of the room, Emily whispered to herself, "If they can create lies, I can destroy them with the truth. And this clause, this will be my weapon." Her heart no longer quivered with fear. Instead, a new fire stirred, determination. The game wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Emily closed her eyes, not to cry, but to envision the path ahead. And in that moment, for the very first time, the thought of revenge flared inside her mind, anchored not in malice, but in law, in truth, in the one condition Margaret could never break. After a long night sitting with the marriage contract, her eyes red from tears, Emily knew she couldn't wait any longer. She was no longer the passive daughter-in-law who silently endured Margaret's invisible strikes. She had to rise, but not with blind rage. She needed a precise plan, built step by step, piece by piece. In her mind, a clear path emerged, a strategy she called CAGE: collect, align, gamble, edge. Collect, gathering the evidence. The first step was proof. Emily remembered the small note from the bank clerk. Check the log. She met him secretly after hours in a small cafe near Willow Lake. Lowering his voice, the man said, "I can't give you the files directly, but there's a way. If you know someone skilled in technology, they can restore the altered logs." Emily immediately thought of an old friend, Alex, an IT worker who used to be a loyal salon customer. When he heard her story, Alex nodded firmly. "All right, I'll help you, but you need to be ready. The people behind this won't go down easily." After many long nights, Alex managed to recover a data chain showing the fraudulent IP address that matched the fake withdrawal. Cold, undeniable numbers that proved Margaret, or someone working for her, had tampered with the records. Emily carefully stored everything on a separate hard drive, locking it inside the drawer beneath her desk. Align, building her allies. Emily knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. She needed allies, people strong enough to stand with her, witnesses Margaret couldn't intimidate. The first she turned to was the lawyer her family had once hired to draft the marriage contract. After hearing her story, he nodded gravely. "The joint ownership clause will protect you, but you'll also need to prove the coercion. If you have a recording of Margaret admitting it, that could be the key." Emily kept her phone close, the one that held the secret recording of Margaret confessing her scheme. She guarded it fiercely, knowing it was her ace in the hole, her final weapon, one that had to remain hidden until the right moment. Next, Emily sought out relatives who resented Margaret's iron-fisted control. Among them was Uncle Henry. At first, he hesitated, torn by years of loyalty, but after hearing everything, his eyes filled with regret. "I once believed her," he whispered, "but maybe I was wrong. If you need me, I'll stand with you." Even James, though still wavering, began to soften as he saw Emily's spirit eroding under the weight of Margaret's attacks. One night, he quietly admitted, "I don't want to lose you, Emily, but if what you're saying is true, I'll need proof no one can deny." Emily squeezed his hand, whispering, "You'll have it." Gamble, the risky move. Emily's plan couldn't simply be to collect and wait. She needed a gamble, a dangerous move that would force Margaret to reveal her hand. With Alex's help, they crafted a trap. They created a fake report, hinting that Emily was preparing to sign the transfer at a law office. They made sure the rumor slipped into the ears of a relative who often carried tales back to Margaret. Emily knew exactly what would happen. Margaret would never ignore such bait, and as predicted, only days later, she called James in a commanding tone. "You must bring her to sign immediately. If you delay, we'll lose everything." James hesitated, but Emily urged him, "Pretend to agree. This way, we'll finally see exactly what she intends." It was the riskiest move yet. If Margaret moved too quickly, if she forced their hand before the trap was ready, Emily could lose everything. Edge, securing the advantage. While Margaret schemed for her decisive strike, Emily and her allies worked quietly, locking down every piece of evidence. The bank clerk confirmed the logs were fake. Alex kept copies of the restored system data. Uncle Henry was prepared to testify. The lawyer reviewed the contract and strengthened their legal ground. And James, though still torn, began leaning toward Emily after witnessing her resilience. Emily realized her true advantage wasn't in strength or power, it was in truth and law. The joint ownership clause was a wall Margaret could never cross unless Emily herself signed. And Emily had sworn, until the entire scheme was exposed, her pen would never touch that transfer. The risks that haunted her. But the path to revenge was never smooth. Emily understood the risks that loomed at every step. Witnesses could back out. Uncle Henry or the bank clerk could be bribed into silence. James could waver. If her husband lost faith in her one more time, the plan could crumble. The family's obsession with honor, they might turn against her again, just to preserve the Carter image. Evidence destroyed. If Margaret discovered the hard drive or the recording, everything could be lost. Emily walked a razor's edge, each step threatening to plunge her into the abyss. The unexpected setback, and then disaster struck. Late one night, Emily returned to the salon to fetch her appointment book. She froze at the sight of the door. The lock had been forced open. Inside, papers were scattered across the floor. The computer was gone, the drawer ripped apart, and with it, the hard drive containing weeks of painstaking evidence. Emily's heart pounded wildly, her breath coming short. Everything she had gathered, the logs, the restored reports, vanished in an instant. In the shadows of her wrecked salon, she felt Margaret's hand closing in, striking first. For a moment, Emily stood paralyzed, staring into the ruin. Panic clawed at her chest. Had she already lost? Was Margaret one step ahead all along? But what Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Emily still held her most powerful weapon. Her secret ace remained untouched, safely hidden: the recording. The question was no longer whether Emily had proof. The question was whether she had enough time and enough allies to turn the tide before everything else collapsed around her. Darkness blanketed Willow Creek as Emily's plan drew closer to its final stage. All those days of endurance, all those sleepless nights, had led her to this moment. There was no turning back now. Everything she cherished, her love, her home, her honor, stood at the edge of collapse. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding fast, and stepped into each stage she had carefully laid out. Though the hard drive from her salon had been stolen, Emily did not break. She remembered Alex's words, that he had created a secret backup in case things went wrong. On a stormy evening, they met inside his car under the shadows of a tree. With worried eyes, Alex handed her a small USB. "This is everything I could save. Be careful, Emily." Inside the drive were the logs proving the withdrawals did not match Emily's location, showing instead a trail from New York. It was the first piece to restore her advantage. Emily gripped it tightly, knowing her enemy could destroy machines, but never erase the truth. Emily and Alex worked late into the nights, encrypting the data, making multiple backups in different places. His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "They can destroy devices, but if you have witnesses and signatures to verify, these logs will hold up in court." Emily nodded, determination shining in her eyes. At the same time, the bank clerk secretly sent her another document, records showing that on the same day, Margaret had made a large transfer to cover her own debts. Placed side by side, the two files fit perfectly, exposing the manipulator behind it all. Emily knew she couldn't fight in the shadows forever. She needed to confront this directly. She arranged a private meeting with Uncle Henry, the bank clerk, and the lawyer. Henry spoke quietly. "At first I was blind to Margaret's ways, but now I see the truth. I'll testify for you." The lawyer reviewed the logs and the secret recording Emily had hidden away. His voice was firm. "This is the key. Don't reveal it too early. Let them trap themselves first." Even James began to shift. One night, he took her hand. "I've never seen you this strong, Emily. Please, let me stand by your side." Tears slid down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from hope rekindled. The date of the grand family gathering was set. Margaret, brimming with confidence, believed Emily had lost every shred of proof. But Emily prepared quietly. On the long wooden table, the lawyer was ready, Henry was present, and the witnesses were all in place. Each piece of evidence lay hidden, waiting for the right moment to explode. Dinner began, and Margaret struck first with her usual venom. She threw a fresh stack of papers across the table, Fake statements showing Emily withdrawing money to fund a supposed lover. Gasps filled the room, whispers spreading quickly. James frowned, turning toward Emily. Emily inhaled deeply, then stood tall, her voice steady and strong. If I really withdrew that money, then why do the bank logs show a login from New York when I've never once left Willow Creek? She pulled out the USB and connected it to the screen the lawyer had prepared. Numbers flashed bright and cold. Transaction ID 2020-93482. User, Emily Carter, timestamp, 02/11/2027, location New York, mismatch. Transaction ID number 2020-93483. User, Margaret Carter, timestamp, 2/45/21. Location, Willow Creek, transfer, $20,000. The numbers didn't lie. The room erupted with murmurs. Eyes began to turn toward Margaret with suspicion. But Margaret was not ready to collapse. She shot to her feet, shouting, "Lies! All of this is fake. Emily hired IT experts to manipulate the logs, and I have a witness." The doors opened and a stranger walked in, claiming to be a technology specialist. His voice was certain. "These logs have signs of tampering. They cannot be accepted as legitimate evidence." The room shifted immediately. Some relatives whispered, "Maybe Margaret's right." James's face twisted with doubt again, his eyes turning on Emily. For a moment, her world seemed to shatter. Her legs shook, her heart clenched. Everything she had fought for, all the work, the trust, the allies, was slipping away. In that desperate moment, Emily remembered the lawyer's words. "Don't reveal everything at once. Let them trap themselves." She straightened, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside, her eyes sharp and unwavering. If I truly hired someone to alter the data, then why does the bank still hold the original logs in their system? And why is there someone who heard Margaret admit she planned to force me into signing? Gasps swept through the room. Margaret flinched for the first time, but quickly barked back. "No one heard anything. No one." Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. She met Margaret's eyes and whispered, "Are you sure, Mother?" The room fell silent. James's gaze wavered between his wife and his mother, torn apart by doubt. The lawyer gave Emily a small nod. It was time. But Emily wasn't ready to unleash her secret ace. Not yet. She knew one more move was needed, one final step to make Margaret destroy herself. The air in the room thickened, heavy enough to choke. Margaret trembled, but still tried to cling to her power. Emily, however, stood tall, her eyes blazing brighter than ever. Everyone waited, every breath held, every heart pounded in anticipation of the moment to come. And in Emily's chest, a whisper rose like a drumbeat. It comes down to one last move. The family dinner inside the two-story Carter house, once a place of warmth and laughter, had now turned into a battlefield. No clinking of forks and knives, no cheerful chatter, only suspicious eyes, tense silence, and the heavy thump of Emily's heartbeat filling her chest. This was no ordinary meal. It was a hidden courtroom of the Carter family. And today, the truth would be revealed. Margaret stood at the head of the table, her figure still commanding, her eyes blazing with fury. She believed she had already won. She trusted that her forged witness and James's wavering faith would crush every effort Emily had made. But for the first time, Emily was no longer trembling. She rose to her feet, placed her palms firmly on the wooden table, and spoke with a voice that rang like steel. "For so long, I've been accused of cheating, stealing, and tearing this family apart. But tonight, I will show you who has truly been behind every single lie." The room fell silent. James held his breath. Uncle Henry stared intently. The lawyer gave her a subtle, approving nod. Emily inhaled deeply and laid out the evidence, each piece once used as a dagger against her, now turned into her weapon of truth. The fake email. Emily placed the printout on the table. This email was said to be mine, written to a supposed lover. But according to the IT report, the IP address originated from Margaret's neighborhood, not from my computer. James glanced at his mother, his face paling. The altered bank logs. Emily connected the USB to the screen. Here is the original log. It shows a withdrawal under my name, but the IP came from New York, while I've never left Willow Creek. And on that same day, Margaret made a large transfer from her own account to cover her personal debt. The glowing numbers cut through the silence like a blade. The anonymous recording. Emily pressed play on her phone. Margaret's voice, cold and venomous, filled the room. She must sign it over. If not, I'll invent more affairs, smear her until no one stands by her. When that happens, James will have no choice but to abandon her. Not a word was spoken. Whispers turned into stunned silence. James sat frozen, his face pale as death. The side-by-side comparison. The lawyer held up the official printouts. On one side, the fake transaction under Emily's name. On the other, Margaret's real transfer, just minutes apart. These records align perfectly. This is no longer suspicion, this is truth. Finally, Emily revealed her ultimate weapon, the secret ace. She pressed play on the full recording she had hidden all along. Margaret's voice was unmistakable, every word tolling like a bell of doom. I'll force her to sign over the house and the salon. Once she loses everything, I'll save myself from debt. The reputation will still be mine, and she'll be nothing. The sound reverberated through the room. There was no way to deny it now. Every eye turned to Margaret, the woman who had spun a web of deceit, now trapped in her own words. Margaret trembled, her hand clutching the chair. No, it wasn't me. Someone tampered with it. You've all been tricked. But her voice no longer carried certainty. James rose to his feet, his face torn with sorrow but firm at last. Mother, enough. I believed you, but the truth cannot be denied. You betrayed this family. Uncle Henry let out a heavy sigh. Margaret, I once supported you, but today, before such undeniable proof, I cannot protect you. You've disgraced the Carter name. The lawyer stood, his voice sharp and unyielding. According to the marriage contract, Emily and James jointly own the house and the salon. No one can coerce Emily into transferring them. This scheme is unlawful. And with this evidence, if taken to court, Margaret Carter would be held fully accountable. Margaret collapsed into her chair, her face pale. She had once controlled everything, but now, faced with irrefutable proof, her power shattered in an instant. Consequences. Now, in front of the entire family, Margaret was forced to sign a legal document relinquishing control of all finances and promising never to interfere in James and Emily's marriage again. Every eye in the room burned with disappointment and disdain. The woman who once reigned supreme was struck down in the very arena she had created. Emily did not gloat. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of release. She clasped James's hand tightly. He looked at her, his eyes brimming with regret and gratitude. I'm sorry, Emily. I should have believed you sooner. She shook her head gently, whispering, What matters is that you're here now. Margaret said nothing, her shoulders trembling. She knew that in that single moment, her honor, her influence, and the respect of her family had all crumbled to dust. No one wanted to hear her voice anymore. And with one trembling signature, she relinquished her control forever. In that moment, Emily felt justice as something tangible, clear and undeniable. It wasn't achieved through blind vengeance, but through truth, law, and her own unyielding resolve. Every scheme, every lie collapsed under the weight of reality. The family dinner ended not with laughter, but with heavy silence. Yet within that silence, Emily discovered her freedom. For the first time in months, she could lift her head high, proud that she had fought to the very end, and prevailed. Justice had been served. And Margaret Carter, once the queen of her household, was left with nothing but isolation and the bitter shame carved into memory. After that fateful dinner, Margaret Carter's name fell to the very bottom. The woman who once held authority, who once forced the entire family to bow their heads, was now shunned by her own relatives. At family gatherings, no one invited her to sit at the head of the table anymore. In Willow Creek, whispers followed her wherever she went. That's the woman who framed her own daughter-in-law to steal the family assets. Old friends avoided her. Neighbors turned their backs. Inside the vast, empty house, Margaret lived in solitude, her reputation shattered, her only companion the ticking clock reminding her of emptiness. The long-term effects aunt had become her bitter reality, a lifetime of power traded for years of loneliness and disgrace. Meanwhile, Emily stepped into a new chapter, new normal protag. She and James laid their scars to rest and began again. Her salon, Emily's touch, grew busier than ever. For now, the townspeople looked at her with admiration and compassion. The two-story house that once served as a battlefield now echoed with laughter. And 1 year later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby boy, a living symbol of the family's renewal. But among it all, A small light of humanity flickered. Uncle Henry, who had once blindly believed Margaret, changed after witnessing the truth. He came to Emily with tears in his eyes and said, "I'm sorry for not believing you from the start, but I promise, from now on, I'll be here, as real family." Emily smiled, took his hand, and forgave him. As the shadows lifted and wounds began to heal, Emily realized victory was not just about unmasking the guilty. It was also about preserving love in hearts willing to repent. And that, she understood, was the true foundation of a home. In a family, true love never comes with control. Truth can be twisted, but in the end, it will shatter every lie. This is the powerful lesson from Emily's story. A woman who seemed fragile, yet with faith, determination, and her desire to protect her home, rose up against every scheme to claim justice for herself. But what about you? If you were misunderstood, cornered, and pushed down, would you have the courage to stand up and defend the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else who is living through a similar struggle. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe to the True Revenge Stories channel. Give it a like, and share the video so others can hear these powerful journeys toward justice. Every day, we bring you new revenge stories filled with emotion, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of truth. And if you want more, dive into our playlist, where each story pulls you into the tension, the heartbreak, and the final reckoning, with every ending carrying a deeper message. So, are you ready for the next story?